Some translations say, if I don't feel like I have a booming enough voice, I'll ask them to really give me the reverb to make it kick up there. Some translations say, like a weaned child is my soul within me. That's such a simple, pristine little psalm, but how nice it would be to be able to say that about yourself. My heart is not proud. My eyes aren't haughty. I don't concern myself about things that are too great or too wonderful. I'm calm, I'm quiet, I'm still like a weaned child. My soul is within me. If we opened up the doors to your heart this morning and could look at your soul, could it be said about your soul? Would it be calm, settled, still, at peace, quiet, content? Or would we say it's somewhat restless and anxious and driven and unsettled and discontented? I want to break down the psalm poetically for just a minute because it's such a simple one. I want us to see how the writer, and remember, these psalms are really songs, so how the lyrical composition looks and then what it means. It's such a coupling here for a few different verses that the writer uses parallelism. This is a really common Hebrew poetry technique, and so for American poetry, if you're a poet, you try to say as much as you can in as few words as possible. For Hebrew poetry, saying the same thing once wasn't quite good enough. If it was really worth saying, it was worth saying several different times in several different ways. So if you're reading the Psalms especially, or sometimes Proverbs, you'll notice the techniques they use, they'll repeat themselves a lot. And so they may actually literally repeat the same line, or they may use a parallelism that's very similar, so they'll repeat it in a slightly different way, using slightly different words that mean the same thing, or they'll take a phrase and then they'll turn it around and look at it from a different angle, or they'll repeat it by using the opposite. But in any event, what they're trying to say is this is just something we really want to dwell on because it's important. So at the beginning, there's a parallelism. It says, "My heart is not proud, Lord." This is a song to God. It's a worship song. My heart is not proud. The Lord looks at the heart. And you can see, Lord, that mine isn't overestimating myself. Pride is not to think highly of yourself. Pride is to think too highly about yourself. And in my heart, I know where I stand, especially when it comes to relation to God. My heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. It's a similar parallelism, but it has a slightly different meaning. Haughty eyes, if you have the image of haughty eyes, this is eyes that are up looking down on others. My eyes are not haughty. I'm not arrogant. I'm not thinking that I'm somewhere up here looking down on people as if they were less than me. Which is really a cousin to pride. It's pride in relationship. Then there's another couple that is in this whole family group of pride. It says, I don't concern myself about things that are too wonderful for me. Rephrase, I don't grasp things that are beyond me or too great for me. What this is getting at is saying, I don't have to know everything to be content. I don't have to get my mind around all the things that really only God knows in order to have a settled life. It's not saying I'm not curious, I don't want to learn, I don't like to explore. What it's saying is I don't have to be in control. I don't have to step onto the throne and grasp a hold of things that are really beyond human comprehension. A good word for this would be overambitious. Not ambitious, overambitious. I have a friend who's an Olympic athlete, and during one of his competitions, he was staying between times, and after the competition, he was staying in a beachside resort in a different country. And there were other world-class athletes in that resort, and so one night he was in the common area socializing with other people, and he met another really amazing athlete who was a swimmer. She was just a competitive swimmer. And so they started talking, and somehow a little friendly rivalry rose up in their conversation. And you can imagine a bunch of really competitive people in the same room. And so my friend, he started talking to this competitive swimmer and kind of thought, I think I could take her in swimming, although his sport had nothing to do with water. And so they ended up on the beach, and they ended up in their swimming suits, and they had a little competition, and they said, okay, well, here's the deal. We'll swim out into the ocean. First one to turn back loses. I told you I had a friend, right? Actually, he's still alive. So here they go. She a competitive swimmer, he a competitive person, and they're swimming farther and farther and farther and farther out, looking over to see if the other person's still swimming. They are. Can't stop. They didn't stop yet. She's still going. Can't get beat by a girl. I'm sure that's what he was thinking. Until finally they start glancing back, and the shoreline is a speck. The buildings that they're staying in are barely visible. They had gone so far out to sea that it was dangerous. Until finally, as the fatigue is setting in, and remember, if you don't have to be a math whiz to realize as far as you swim out, you also have to swim back. Until finally she realized, I would call it wisdom, it's not worth winning for. I'm turning around. And so she headed around. As soon as she turned around, he turned around. But then the competition became the farthest thing from their minds because they were struggling for their life. One of those sharp, pointy fins swam right between them. And they began to swim and look at this barely visible distant shoreline. Now, with extreme fatigue setting in, both beginning to struggle and gasp for their life to get back to the shore. They did. Exhausted, depleted, fell on the shoreline. But see, what happened was, and by the way, you'll know this story isn't really about me because I couldn't swim 2 miles to save my life. I had to. So this is really about a friend of mine. It's not one of those fictitious friends of mine. And you also know that I'm not an Olympic athlete, so this is surely not about me. But what happened was my friend overestimated himself. He underestimated the ocean, and his competition to win against somebody else, to be a better athlete, to be better, just about killed them both. My heart's not proud, my eyes are not haughty, I'm not overambitious. There are several different categories that we can find ourselves being overly ambitious in. One of them is physical. This is perhaps the most obvious. This is where we just step over reasonable lines of limitations. We try to transcend human limits, and maybe it's simply by not resting enough. By thinking we can do without sleep and we won't suffer any consequences. Maybe this is being overly ambitious in how much we think we can work and work and work without resting. Maybe it's being overly ambitious with how far we think we can swim without dying. Maybe it's just being overambitious by really believing that we can cheat death perpetually. Somewhere inside we know we're mortal. But somewhere outside we always want to avoid the topic as long as humanly possible. we can be over-ambitious intellectually. That's somewhat what the lyricist was getting at. Being ambitious intellectually is a good thing. In fact, being ambitious in any of these categories is a really good thing. But being over-ambitious can get us into trouble, and it can totally unsettle the peace that God is trying to provide in our souls. Being over-ambitious intellectually is having to be a know-it-all. It's not being able to be settled until we've got the full spectrum of information. It's a person who not just wants to know about things, they have to know about things, and they have to be right about them. And if there's any room for speculation, they've got to fill in the gap with concrete evidence. These are people who doubt their beliefs and believe their doubts. They're always on a mission to sort of be God's peer academically. There's over-ambition spiritually. We might call this a Messiah complex. This is where somebody, it's good, it sounds good, except the degree of harm that it causes. This is someone who just feels the need to save everyone. This is common in helping professions like social work or pastors. It translates into some medical helping fields. But this is the person who can't go to bed at night, or counselors. They can't go to bed at night. They can't let it go. The fact that someone was in the pit and they couldn't drag them out. The fact that someone was lost and they couldn't find them. The fact that someone needed help or advice and they couldn't get to them. They couldn't reach them. It unsettles them to an ungodly degree. See how good that sounds? Except it's just too far. Or it could be over spiritually ambitious by the standard which they hold themselves to. Their holiness, their expectation for themselves or others leaves no room for faults, leaves no room for mistakes. It's hard for them to receive forgiveness because it's hard for them to admit forgiveness because there's no room for sin. Overly spiritually ambitious people struggle with grace. You could be overly ambitious socially. An extrovert who loves to network, who loves to know everyone, and who loves to please everyone. And if someone is not in harmony with you, if there's conflict, or if they didn't like a decision, or if they didn't like something you said or something you posted, even if it wasn't your fault, even if you can do nothing to repair it, it dissettles your soul, it disquiets your inside so much because there's a disharmony with another person, and socially your aim is to please. There's overambition in the area of politics. Whether it's a literal elected official, or it could just be in the area of influence, popularity, wanting to have a following, wanting to have your voice be heard and respected, wanting to have people who look up to you, and being unsettled until you've rounded up enough of a poll, until you've got enough majority who think the way you think or who really want to hear what you have to say, and if they don't, boy, it really deflates you. There's overambition when it comes to profession. Professional ambition is good, but overambition is chasing the next promotion. It's living and dying by the accolade. It's all eyes focused on the accomplishment, the end goal, the end game is achievement, the ladder, the next rung calls to you at all moments of the day. And if that ladder breaks or if you get bumped a rung, boy, it hurts more than just your career. There's overambition materially. This is for the person whom enough is never enough. You're warm, you're well fed, your needs are provided, today. It looks like they'll probably be provided tomorrow, but it's not enough. There's something that keeps driving. And whatever you buy, it's like moldy bread. As soon as you put it in your mouth, it's just not it turns bad, and you want something else. And the possessions just can never quite fill the storeroom of your heart like you hope. I have a question. Ambition is good, right? So there are some who could actually use a little bit more ambition professionally. Work a little harder. That could probably be helpful. There are probably some who could use a little more ambition spiritually. Pray a little bit more. Take your spiritual life and your relationship with God more seriously. There are some who could probably take physical ambition a healthier step up. But how do we know when it gets past healthy ambition into the danger zone of over-ambition? How do we know? Here are a couple questions that you could ask. What is my motivation? Ask that question in prayer and be quiet for a minute and see what happens. God, do I want to get the promotion so that my name would mean something to other people? Whose name am I really looking to promote here? What's my motivation for doubling that bank account balance? And God, does that stack up with your motivation at all? What's my motivation for getting the next A? What's my motivation for working without rest? God's usually pretty quick to help us sift out the motivations of our heart if we open the door and ask him. The second question you could ask is, are other areas of my life out of balance because of over-ambition in one area of life? Are other areas of my life out of balance because of one area? Is my social life terribly anemic because all of my eggs are in the professional basket? All of my ambitions go in that direction. Is my spiritual life out of balance because all of my energy is going into the physical ambition? Or vice versa, is my physical life out of balance because of my spiritual Messiah complex? Sometimes getting an A in life means taking the B in the subjects of life. Sounds counterintuitive, isn't it? Because when we're in school, if you want to get a 4.0, if you want to get an A average, you've got to get A's in every subject. But sometimes in life, it just doesn't work that way. Sometimes to get an A in life, you have to take B's in certain subjects of life. Just the other day, I was talking to a friend of mine who he works a full-time job. He has a part-time role in ministry at a church. He has a family, a spouse, and some kids. And he's also pursuing to be ordained as a pastor. So in part of this ordination, he's got a couple classes he's still got to take on a certain timeline. And he's already really, really overwhelmed. So these classes were not really exciting for him. And he was talking with his professor mentor and telling him, should I take these classes? Should I cram them in? What should I do? And here's what the professor mentor, his pastoral mentor, said: take the classes, get them done, get C's. Don't get A's, get C's. Now you could say, what kind of a professor would tell a student to get a C in a course? One who had enough wisdom to know that sometimes to get an A in life, you've got to get a C somewhere here, and a B at work, and an A minus with your family, and an A minus in your spiritual time with God. An overambitious person can't see that till it's too late and they've flunked out on a course that they can't recover from. There's this great story of one of the most ambitious people in history. His name was Alexander the Great. By age 20, he had inherited his father's throne as king of Macedon, 336 BC. And he came in swinging. Alexander the Great had a huge military empire, but he expanded it to one of the largest ancient civilizations of the time. And by the age of 30, having been king only 10 years, he was in charge of this vast empire. He was one of the most noted military leaders in all of history by age 30. People are still studying in academies around the world his tactics on his pre-Christ, BC, 300 years before Christ, ancient military tactics. He ran this tremendous empire. He was filthy rich. He was very smart. He was about the most powerful person in the world at the time. There's a fable, a legend, an ancient story about the day that Alexander met the Greek philosopher Diogenes. Diogenes was known for his simple life and his attention to virtue and priorities. Alexander rode into town to meet Diogenes, and of course, anywhere Alexander the Great goes, it's with pomp. And so he rode into town with a royal entourage, and he found the place where Diogenes was sitting outside, resting on a column. This story is told 100 different ways. I'll tell you the way I heard it. And he walks up to Diogenes, this poor, humble little thinker. And in his greatness and benevolence, he was going to offer Diogenes one wish. And he said, Diogenes, I will give you whatever you want. What do you ask of me? Diogenes looks up and says, can you stand a little to the right? You're blocking my sun. It's a great parable of the difference of a quiet and contented heart that has no need for ambition, for political power, for wealth, is not tied its happiness to material or professional gain. Jesus said it like this, what good is it? What good is it? What do you gain if you gain everything in the world, but lose track of your soul? This short little song, this poem, Psalm 131, gives us two clues as to what destroys the quiet, contented peacefulness of our heart. One of those is over-reliance on ourself. It's in the family group of pride, ambition, arrogance. But it gives us another clue to the opposite end of what can destroy the quiet peacefulness of our soul that we desire, the settledness inside, no matter what's going on around us. He says, then in contrast, he uses a metaphor, like a weaned child is my soul within me. You know what a weaned child is, don't you? It's a child who's not nursing anymore. It's a child who's starting to eat solid food and can actually go maybe an entire day without mom. It's also a child who's beginning to learn distance between feedings and cravings and cryings. He says, like a weaned child is my soul within me. I tell you, one of the most anxious moments for me in the last few years was when our children were infants and we would take them to a restaurant, like a public restaurant. Boy, I tell you, I have such mercy on parents of infants in public places these days, because we'd go into a restaurant, and you know what happens in restaurants. What's supposed to happen is you pull up a chair, everybody's sitting around enjoying the ambiance, and you get a menu, and you look at what you'd like to eat, and then somebody comes, and you put in your request, I would like this, and then what do? They leave, and you wait, and you talk, and then eventually, if you've done this restaurant thing before, you know most restaurants, they will actually bring the food that you ordered and put it in front of you. And so during the meantime, you just enjoy talking with the people you're with. Well, here's a child's version of going to a restaurant. I'm hungry. No, you didn't hear me. I'm hungry now. And it's just like this gritting contrast between the way you're supposed to function in a restaurant and the way a child's mind perceives it. I'm hungry now. I'm going to scream and scream until you pay attention to the fact that I'm starving to death. I haven't had milk in like 27 minutes. Man, this was a great cause of social anxiety for me until I chilled out. The writer is saying, I have learned to go from spiritually anxious, screaming, impatient, demanding, to waiting and trusting. How weaned are you, friends? Spiritually. Over-relying on God impatiently. How weaned are you in terms of your relationship when you have to wait? If you've presented your need, if you put in your order and say, God, here's what I need, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what I'm hungry for, here's the lack, here's the obvious problem I'm dealing with, and then it seems like he just walks away and you're going, where's he going? I don't know if he heard me. Maybe I need to scream louder. The lyricist said, I was like that. I've weaned, meaning I wasn't always that mature, but now my soul is quiet in the middle. Because I've built up enough history to trust that my father or my spiritual father hears my voice, knows my needs, and will provide. I can just rest in that. Remember those categories I told you about that you can be overambitious in? I'm going to say them one more time, and I'd encourage you to write them down. I'm going to ask you to reflect on them. One of them is physical. You can be physically overambitious. One of them is intellectual. One of them is spiritual. We can be overambitious when it comes to social relationships. We can overreach in terms of profession. We can be overambitious when it comes to political influence or material gain. If you're here and you're saying, I could use a little bit more of that quiet, calm, contented, peaceful soul in my life, how do I get it? Because it doesn't tell us how to get it, does it? Well, actually, he does. He concludes with pretty much a national decree. Put your hope in the Lord. Now and forever, and while you're waiting, and in the meantime. If you want more of a quiet, contented peace inside of you, disregarding the circumstances around you, still having peace, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is God or life itself will give you opportunities to develop that soul. The bad news is those opportunities are often unpleasant. How do you gain humility and lose your pride? Is get knocked off your horse a couple times and realize, I'm here. God's here. How do you be weaned? How do you wean a child? You don't slap them. You don't cut them cold turkey. You just make them wait a little bit longer each time. If the feeding is normally at 10, we're going to wait till 10:15. And then next time till 10:30. If I feed you 3 times a night, I'm going to cut it down to 2. And then another week, I'm going to cut it down to 1. And then you're going to go through the whole night sleeping peacefully. My kids aren't infants anymore. I can rewrite the story. if God or circumstances of life are giving you that weaning or helping you right size your estimation of yourself and God, maybe he's developing within you, even if ever so unpleasantly, a peaceful, quiet, contented soul that hopes in God. As we sing this last song, I'm going to ask you to just reflect. Open your heart to God and say, God, look at my soul. You know it anyway. Look at my heart. You see it clearly. Is there something? Place where I'm overreaching, place where I need to learn. And can we talk about that this morning? Can you help? And now may the love of God, the peace of Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you as you go. You are sent.